You are listening to the Techie Leadership Show with Bogdan and Andrei. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Techie Leadership Show. Today with us we have Dearg OBartuin. He has 20 years experience in scaling regulated financial services such as banks, electronic money institutions, and recently in open banking. A strategic leader bridging the gap between business values and product execution. Dearg has led regulated banking and electronic money projects with oversight from the FCA, MFSA, CBN, FDIC, and GFSC. Boy, I'm sure curious to find out what all those acronyms mean. Some of the companies he has worked with are Unilever, KPMG, the English Heritage, BitPesa, London Block Exchange, IDT, Founders Bank Project, and Open Bank, where he is the CEO of. Hello, Dearg, and welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me. So those acronyms they're just regulators. There's no way of trying to make that sexy in any way whatsoever. It's just the various regulators.
Government.
And government, exactly, yeah. Although they're all great people within those respective departments. But yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, same here. Do you want to add anything else about yourself?
No, I think you've covered it. I just wish it was a little bit more exciting, But yeah, my background is mostly in banking, financial services as a CTO. First and foremost, I stepped into the CEO role fairly recently for the first time. So that's a nice challenge. But yet over the last 20 odd years, it's been primarily trying to challenge banks and challenge financial services in a tech way.
Yeah, and it's challenging working with money all the time, because if everything works correctly, nobody says like, congratulations, it's so awesome, your system works so great. But if you're off for one penny, you're going to find out really fast about it.
Yeah,
and depending on which side you're off by a penny, because if you're off in your own detriment, you will not find out.
Well, let me maybe start off with something interesting about that. Actually, if our ledger was in the favor as a positive mismatch, the individual would probably be fired faster than it being in a negative mismatch, because a positive mismatch means that we've probably been doing something a little bit untoward along the way to make it not balance. Whereas negative, usually, think of a store with a cash machine, right? So you've got the till or a register, I'm not sure what the terminology is. And if you're handing out change to somebody for a transaction and they give you, I don't know, 20 euros and you give them the wrong change back and it was too much, then that till is going to be down. Whereas if you've got too much, then something's going on. There's some miscounting going on there. So it's actually a first indicator of financial crime. So you've already hit on something there that's pretty evident about secret within our industry, is that the way in which we have to build our ledger is the first and foremost thing to get right first.
Actually, funny story about that. This is the second time in 30 years I heard this. You put it way better because you have experience in financial institutions. But I remember being 5 years old in my mother's office. She was doing the books. And she said that something's wrong. We have plus value. And being a kid, I said, plus is good. It's plus. And she said, no. And I remember this quote, plus is minus. Yes. And it racked my brain for years. I just couldn't. It
still racks my brain.
Yeah, but it makes sense. It has to be 00. It has to be 00 on both ends. Otherwise, it's always missing. It's either missing on your side, your customer side, your business side, the government.
It's not good for business.
No,
definitely
it's not.
And the art of double accounting, bookkeeping methodology is boring, but it's what keeps us all sane and allows us to know exactly where our balance really is in real time. I hope you weren't fired by your mother, though. That would be terrible.
No. Well, kind of hard for her. It was her business.
Awesome,
well, people that are, especially the people that are working now in banking technology, they're unsung heroes in my respect, because people that have it tougher than them would be like people that are working on medical devices, where a person's life really is in their hands, basically. And with one error, massive loss of life can happen. And banking is right next to it, because people really care about their money.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I
I
know two
agree.
companies that really like people in financing, especially in accounting. The first is, I forgot the name of the studio, that starred Ben Affleck as the accountant. Talk about a cool accountant.
Oh yeah, I know the movie you're talking about. The name escapes me, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I do know the one you
Yeah,
mean.
no, it's called The Accountant. That's the
Oh, The
name of
Accountant. Of
the
course it is.
movie.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. They wanted to drive straight, no mystery there. You know what you're getting. And the second company that really loves accounting and accountants is Harley Davidson, especially
Oh,
in the US.
yeah.
They buy
Well,
a lot of Harleys.
Oh,
I inherited a project a few years ago. I'm probably better off not naming which one out of the list that you gave because the story I'm about to tell might not be fantastic. The team that we inherited on that particular project, my development team, we had just met that day, and they had a philosophy of trying to release daily, which is great. I'm a big advocate for that. I like committing to production daily if you can do. But in this instance, it broke part of the ledger, and what they were doing was converting currencies from one currency to another, and there was a decimal place issue. So some people were doing very, very well if you were buying currencies of only 2 decimal places versus currencies with more. And all I can say is that it was a big eye opener from a day one on the job, or maybe it was week one on the job when I think about it, not to exaggerate, but it was certainly some people's first day on the job, on the team.
Yes.
That day. And I remember looking at the dashboards that I was still trying to get familiar with myself of losses on the misadjustment when it came to our trading account. And very long story short, we were losing thousands of dollars a minute that we didn't put a hot fix out. But I do remember
Released in production.
This is in production. So here's another thing that was quite a lesson on that day. So putting the losses to the side for a moment, there was a real dilemma that was presented. One half of my team was saying, well, we can get a hot fix out to this, but we have to push it untested straight to prod. And then the other half of my team was saying, well, that's ludicrous. You've got to write a test first, but it's going to take us a couple of hours. So what do you do? Right?
Exactly. What do you do?
Yeah. What do you do? So what I did actually was chose the option to take the hit on the cost of the loss. You know, I'd always put best practice before financial value. But it was a real lesson on that day, not only for me, but equally for the whole team. And it was actually a bit of a blessing in disguise, because what that exercise cost us financially built a core team where we all shared the same values, and that was best practice first.
Well, that's a fast team building exercise
to
do. Costly, but fast and effective, it seems.
And really fast to determine who the leaders and go-getters in the team are, the people who get stuff done and the people who know how to self-manage and also collaborate with others, because it's never a one-man show.
Agreed. And it turned out the fix that we put out worked. But it was the test that we wrote first that identified a problem that would have happened that would have been far more expensive if we'd have gone straight to prod. So it was the right decision. But hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? So, great team, by the way. Everybody on that team is still performing on that particular project daily, and they're awesome.
Awesome.
That's why I love tests. Tests are really good. If you want to build good software, at least reliable software, have some tests.
You need
highly recommend it.
Yeah. And you're not the first company that had that problem, because a company that was trading currencies online had servers. They did a change where they wanted to bet against the market, and they updated 9 servers, and the 10th they forgot to update it. So they were betting against each other, lost $400,000 in one day.
Well, we didn't lose anywhere near as much as that, but I can see how that could easily happen. Oh, that's painful. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. Well, since we're getting into stories, I'm really curious about your stories. So starting from the top, what is the biggest leadership success story you witnessed personally?
Oh, God. Of all of the questions, this is the one that I struggle with most, because the market changes and my position changes all of the time, that I'm just constantly blown away with some of the good stuff that I see all of the time. But I think a big turning point for me, going back very early in my career, it was the importance of just, and it sounds really cliche, but just hiring the right team. Like there were just so many people that I've been mentored by over the years where their philosophy used to be, or still is in fact, for those that are still within the industry, put so much time into me, which I was very grateful for, but they always had the remit in their mind, whether they shared it with me or not, that at some point they were going to cannibalize themselves and move on to the next thing. So their goal was really to try and get their teams molded in a way where they could do so safely and do so admirably, really, without it being a stress or without getting fired first. Because, you know, for those of you listeners will know that if you're at the CTO level or even the lead developer level, you tend to have a cadence of about 2-3 years maximum, and then your shelf life kind of moves on. So the biggest success story for me really in all of those years, which I do feel like a very old man, I must admit at this stage, but for all the things I've seen, it's just getting the hiring of the team correct first and foremost, and pretty rapidly in the early days, it was almost like one of my demands of joining a new project, regardless of their funding state or their size or any of those kind of vanity metrics, as long as they had a budget for not just numbers of team, but equally experienced and also product people, just as important to have there as developers a lot of the time. Some projects kind of exclude them a little bit, but I've always been a big bull for that. So yeah, the short answer to your question is just make sure that you can get the best team around you as soon as possible. And I've seen that in every project I've been in, and I've always been really impressed by that.
Well, you are lucky. And I like how you put it, like having leaders that basically cannibalize themselves. And so they become obsolete in the position because they build such a great team, and there's leadership waiting inside the team to take their spots, so they can actually themselves are free to move. Because that's one secret to be able to go to the next position, is to be really good in this position, become obsolete so you can leave and stay with a pristine track record, basically.
Not so much as become obsolete as automate your job, and add the necessary redundancies and the key areas, and make sure that other people can, like, if 3 people can replace you and can do so on a budget and fast, that's perfect condition.
Let's not get into the bosses that don't want to leave and hang on the reins of power like it's their life there.
Job for life. And my career started the opposite to most people, and that was in the big corporate kind of public companies. And I don't get me wrong, I had a great time there. I really did, and I learned a lot very quickly. And I was actually really lucky because when I joined Unilever, for example, I was 18, and within a year or two, I won't tell you how old I am now, by the way, but at the time it was 18, and within a year or two, very rapid progression. So they were kind of forward thinking and trying to take this huge ship and make it agile, and they were really kind of, they had the future in mind very quickly. But I say that because when I moved to Startup Land, I found that now what I got frustrated about with the big public companies, I had a new frustration in small startups, but it was more a lack of resource. Like that's the biggest shock you get going from unlimited budget. It often means way too much time and too much bureaucracy, and you sacrifice all of that and you go into an agile state of startup land, and all of a sudden you've got to make a lot of things happen with no money, no team, get your hands dirty. So I love that. I genuinely enjoy the startup kind of methodology and the pros and cons that come with it. But the people that I left behind in the corporate world were very much jobs for life. They probably joined at 18 as well, and they've stayed there until they're 40 or 50. And I think that's great, for some people, and some companies really do need some solid captains at the table for that. But the old Steve Jobs kind of Pepsi Cola quote, where it's like, do you want to stay making sugar water or come with me and change the world? That's how I felt when I met my first startup CEO, and I just fell in love with the whole risk element of what startup was. So, pros and cons.
Did you get the same offer?
To change the world? Every CEO wants you to go off and change the world, and if they don't convince you, then you're never going to join them, right? So I love All of the leaders that I've been led by over the years have had that one thing in common. Socially narcissistic, but in a positive way, if you can be. Completely self-believing, but they have the ability to really sell the project to you. And if they don't, how in the world can you hope that they're going to raise the relevant money to keep it alive in the first place? They didn't quite use those words to answer your question, but it was the same result for sure. And I've been to many now. I think I'm on startup 14 or something in as many years.
14.
So I think so.
So
yeah,
now I'm really curious, like, what are like the difference in leadership that you see between being in the corporate world and the big companies and being in a startup environment? Are there differences, or leadership is leadership?
No, I think there are differences. I think the first thing is a sense of entitlement. When you've got a job for life, you feel that you can take your time. You're very risk adverse, and typically you can delegate well. Your teams are larger, your resources are better. And I'm kind of presenting this as if that's a negative place to be, and it really isn't. I mean, that is for people, a lot of people, in fact. But if you are, risk hungry and you do want to move the ball forward, and you absolutely have a mindset, at least, that you just want to execute everything that you think about, then there's only one way you can do that in my mind, and that is startup land. So there is a difference in leadership, because in startup land, you've got to do a hell of a lot more yourself. And you should want to, by the way. And there's no sense of entitlement, and there should be flat management. I really don't like tiers of hierarchy. Strip all of that away, have people on a level playing field, and just hope that what you are as a facilitator. Now in my career, I feel more of a facilitator to my teams than I do an educator, right? So I believe that they already know, otherwise that's why they're there, because I only hire awesome people, right? We all do, right? But
yes.
How do I yes, exactly. So, but how do I unblock them? How do I facilitate their next move? So use me, as much as I'm using you. And I much prefer that, because if that was a blue chip or a public company, you just wouldn't have that freedom. You wouldn't have that same relationship either. You would feel very much worried to bring something to the table or try and get it over the line. And you can be bogged down in the same project for years, and the idea of that frightens me.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like the difference between two mechanical engineers. One of them went on to work with a big automaker and design a new model in 8-9 years. And the other one joined a garage and made a cool custom one-off. It's like one is more hands-on and the other is more theoretical, more bureaucracy. So
I agree. I wish I could pronounce this gentleman's name, but I'm going to have a stab. I think it's Franz Holzhausen. He's the chief designer at Tesla, and he came from Mazda. By the way, I just had to Google that. I didn't know that in my head. That would be very impressive, right? But he joined Mazda, this very well-known, safe place to be, to join. That's your Pepsi Cola story right there. And what's he done? He's gone on to build some of the coolest cars in the world. And that's how I felt when I was leaving big ship kind of public company into the risk of, oh my God, am I going to be able to pay the rent next month? And I just got excited by it. Everybody's different.
I'll gamble to say that you probably weren't married when you made the change. No children.
Yeah, I wouldn't take that bet, because you'd be absolutely right. No children. I had an option at the time, at that age, to go abroad for a while, or to go into the area of tech. So one was the army and one was technology. And I chose tech because do you know what, when I think about it, the reason why I did that, I think more than likely was because I was too unfit. I probably wouldn't have qualified in the army. That's the truth. I've always not been able to run very far. But also, I've just been a bit of an island, really, as an individual. I like to be creative and then try and execute ideas. And I really kind of have problems with authority when it comes to that. And that's just not the right environment for me. But respect to those that do have that.
Yeah.
And 14 startups. That's a lot.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, and startups also come with high risk of failure. So with that in mind, what is the biggest leadership failure you had the unfortunate experience of witnessing?
Well, first of all, that was a great segue into the failure question. I have to say, very impressive.
Thank you. We struggle here.
You guys are professionals for sure. Biggest failure, it's lies, for sure. I'm quite passionate about this, but where people are not humble enough to be able to accept the things that they can't do, and it can come to the detriment of the overall success or failure of a project. And I've seen this many times over the years, and sometimes I haven't always been in the leadership position myself to kind of see this. So seeing it, in a junior role as you do, but you just feel that you don't have the right relationship to be able to call BS out on where you see it. So yeah, lies for sure is the number one thing, and just the inability to say, I don't know how to do that. But what I love about the engineering mindset is when you don't know something, is let's try and work that out, and let's do that in a smart way, in an efficient way, and deliver it kind of correctly, rather than trying to be just bashing out code all the time, regardless of well, it comes back to our analogy about testing, right? It's the same thing. So I see far too much dishonesty, I think, when it comes to from a leadership perspective I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the teams. And I just wish there was less of that. And I try to encourage that myself.
So, is it, would you say, like it's all like dishonesty from the leadership standpoint, or is it over optimism, or a blend of the two?
That's a very good question. I suppose there's no right or wrong to that question. It's going to be person specific. In my examples, it could be a blend of the two, but either way, the result is the same. And ultimately, it means you're playing with the livelihoods of other folk on your team.
Oh yeah.
If you were in a tank with me and I'd said to you that I was a gunner for 20 years and I'd never touched a gun before, and all of a sudden, right? I mean, it wouldn't take long before you throw me out, right? So
get up there and shoot something. Pew pew pew.
So all right, it's not the same result in that instance. But
well, that's not optimism. That's flat out lying in that.
Talk about a Wall-E Coyote situation.
So I'm definitely not describing people that have optimism and they're learning as they go, because in a way that's problem solving. That to me is the same thing. I love that. But I have unfortunately seen in this industry today, it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be 20 years ago. Because you've got to remember, really? 20 years ago, it was the millennium. People were making hundreds of dollars an hour just by upgrading pre-Pentium processors just to get past the millennium bug. And, it was just a crazy monopoly of wealth back there. So you had people that were car salesmen, literally car salesmen, switching jobs to be IT support in quotes. Because and call themselves experts. Unfortunately, some of those folks stayed in the industry a little bit too long, and then when you were legitimately trying to solve problems for people, you end up with some bad characters. But that's not the case today. I mean, people are so much smarter today. Even the CEOs that are non-technical that I've worked for in the past, we can't forget how much they rely upon their CTO specifically from a tech perspective, and their CPO if they have the luxury of having one, to steer them. They haven't got the capability a lot of the time to challenge the thinking or the reasoning of tech and product people. So that's why I just always like to see the right person in the right role who really genuinely is there for the good of the project. So hopefully that's not too long of an answer, but it does frustrate me more than anything else.
No, it's perfect, and I think I know why the situation changed nowadays. The learning curve has gotten so steep that it takes you at least 1 year to be able to fake it to make it.
That's a good
so
point.
And this kind of sifts out all the people that aren't willing to put in the work, because 1 year of work just to be able to know what you're going to do, not have actual experience, just be able to talk about it, that's a lot of work to fake it.
Yeah, agreed. And it shows in your team as well. You know, you'll always find some people will put a massive barrier between themselves and their team. And I often wonder, are you doing that because you're maybe hiding behind something, or is it because you're just, you know, more of an introvert? Either way, it's fine. But, you know, one other thing to add on to this is like where some people in authority or they'll have some leadership decision making to do, and they'll do it in a stubborn way. They're making decisions because it's what they feel comfortable with at the time, as opposed to, you know, trying to solve a real problem on a specific project that's going to be innovative and move something forward. And because it's those ingredients that make a startup into a unicorn. If you've got, you know, the wrong horsemen, for want of a better analogy, that are, you know, they're just kind of rolling out the same old stack over and over again because they're not upskilling as they go. But they're disguising that in arrogance. Then ultimately that project is unless there's something, you know, crazy lucky going to happen, it will never be a unicorn, in my opinion.
It's kind of hard to hope for luck. In my opinion, it's always something that you may hope for, but don't look forward for. So if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But speaking about those special ingredients necessary for a startup to jumpstart into a unicorn, what is your leadership philosophy?
Ooh, it's very different today than it was 20 years ago.
That's good.
That's really good. It means you're evolving.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I try to be humble without being weak. Yeah. So I can be as passionate and as aggressive as the next guy, but I ultimately, you know, stand by that old cliche of just surrounding myself with far better people. I don't have the luxury anymore after all this time to be on the code base anywhere near as I used to be. So therefore, if you're relying on me to check your pull request and, you know, you got a shocker waiting for you, because that's not going to happen, because I wouldn't trust myself. So, you know, you've got to be humble in where you are at the right stage of your career with that. But I think the number one philosophy that I stand by probably is that passion of vision, and stepping into that kind of CEO role now. I'm absolutely fully appreciating those that have led me in the past, how different that job is to what I've been used to, and it's all about the vision. And when I say sales, I mean selling that vision to your whole team every day, all the time, and being on the one hand so on the pulse that you can spot when you're needed to dive in and parachute and get everybody motivated, while at the same time not smothering and hand-holding and being patronizing. So it's a real delicate blend of skills that you know, I've found over the years. I've been trying to hone in, and not always succeeding, of course, but you know, as time goes on, enjoying it more and more. And I always think about when I was a child, and well, everybody does this, right? So you're a child and you have your parents, and your parents say, you don't want to do that because, you know, take my word for it, I did that when I was your age, and it's going to end in tears, and you do it anyway, yes. Right? It's only now that I appreciate the previous CEOs that I've been led by, when they were trying to steer me down a particular direction that I was just closed-minded to. That was absolutely with far more knowledge than I had at that point. I don't even mean about what I do, but I just mean about the bigger picture, the vision. Yes. So the vision is one thing, and getting the team to execute the vision in their own special way. And there's only one rule I have with my teams anyway for the last few years, and that is, if you join the team the first day, you push to production. That's what you do. So you're part of the code base. You know, you kind of own that little piece, and you just feel like as if you just contributed immediately. So yeah, I mean, you could get me on this subject for a long time, but I just think it's more than anything, just use your two ears rather than your one mouth.
Oh yeah, that's so important. Then, as you said, if you are humble, it actually gives voice to everybody around you. If you have a reputation that you like to push your way around, you push your weight around, then people are not going to speak up, especially the more shy people that you have on the team, and they might have really deep insight that would spare you from a lot of business headaches.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
And another person told me something very interesting. I didn't quite register then. We were speaking about being humble, but also not seeming weak, so having authority. And he said one thing he does is, for example, if they have an important meeting, he makes it a point to let everybody talk, and even the shy people, he asks them questions. He makes it a point to be the last person to speak. So he sums up the conversation. That kind of gives you the power to lead the final direction and landing point of the conversation.
Oh, yeah, I can't agree with that anymore. I mean, yeah, that's a really powerful message actually, because when I was talking about not getting it right, the immediate memory that came into my mind were those grooming sessions where as CTO, I'm in there with my sleeves up and I'm saying, hey guys, why do you want to do it that way? Do it this way, and kind of dictating the answers. And I got very rapidly taught a lesson on that, because you're hiring
Not happy
smart.
developers.
Yes, exactly. The developers don't want to take that very well, but they, you're hiring smart people. Like, why would you be so patronizing or even arrogant to believe that you're going to be the best person in that scenario? So I totally agree with what you're saying. Stay quiet. Often today, I don't even attend. I don't even mean in my existing role, but other roles, I don't attend grooming sessions or decision-making meetings really. Other than to get some feedback afterwards, and as long as I'm kind of happy with the direction it's taking, and because sometimes I may have more information than what the team have at the time. You just want to kind of capture children from going on the road, and that's all I do. Look, it's easy. It's far easier today than it was 20 years ago, I can assure you. But I just believe in the team around me. I really do.
Usually leadership, if done correctly, it's actually really easy and kind of boring actually for the leader doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. You're absolutely right. And it takes you from, well, I wouldn't allow myself to get bored, and I'm sure you'd be the same. But I think that what you end up doing is, if you've got a solid team around you, it allows you to now kind of think about the vision 6 months from now, the roadmap 6 months from now.
Yes.
So if I've got a team of developers that are thinking about the next 4 weeks, a couple of sprints ahead, and I've got a leadership team in between that are probably thinking about 2 to 3 months maximum. Realistically, it's probably only a month or two. I want to be there thinking about 6 months plus, and ensuring that I'm shielding from my team all of the stuff that we're considering high risk, that sound like amazing ideas in January, but before it reaches the engineering stage or even the product stage in June, I want to make sure that's been well validated long before I start burdening them. Yeah.
Oh, it's not good to come like because you get the engineering team really excited about new ideas, and then they find out that we're not doing that, and it creates like a sense of uncertainty in the company, which it doesn't exist actually if you come with each and every idea to them. And also you overload their thinking, because they start thinking like, how do we prepare for this? What do we need to add? And they complicate everything due to it.
Yeah.
And it gets in the way of the tickets that they're currently working on, even though what you're talking about is like 10 sprints away. They will start to think, well, why would I add this form of automation in this sprint if we're going to do that in 6 months? I might as well fix that now. So again, very valuable lessons that I've had to learn the hard way along the way.
I once asked somebody, I told them, listen, nobody can predict the future. How can you plan for 6 months in advance? Because if you could predict the future, you wouldn't need to do the work you're doing. And he stopped for a second and he looked at me and he said, imagine being a leader is like being the captain of a huge oil tanker. Okay, you have to prepare for a stop. It takes you 6 months, the inertia of the boat.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what happens around the whole team. The bigger the company, the bigger the inertia. So I have to plan ahead. Whatever happens, would we like to stop at that destination in 6 months? If the answer is yes, go for it.
Yeah, and we're honing this in just because of the subject of the podcast into the tech leadership side of it. But then when you take yourself out of that and you add an additional bubble around all of that, which is operations and funding and third-party sales techniques and hiring and all these other things, right? And that's why I respect the leaders in my past, because I just completely underestimated what their workload was, and I thought I was busy. Those people are really, really busy. So respect your CEOs, folks. They know what they're doing, I promise.
For sure, especially if they're building like a good team around them. Because eventually, even the CEO, if he builds a good CISO team around him, he gets more time to think about like what happens in 6 months, what happens in 1 year. So, but it's hard. It's hard to build that team at that level. People with enough experience to bring them apart. You really need to sell them on the vision. As you said, so you need to be close to it all the time.
Yeah, and that vision changes. It's not like as if it's the same vision all the time. Right? It pivots every day. The amount of times I have people saying to me that we're in the middle of doing some regulatory. I won't turn this into a story because it is the most boring story in the world. But we're in the middle of writing a regulatory application for some licensing. Okay, and the thing with that is it might take several months to write. We're already maybe 2 or 3 months into it. Naturally, from a technical background, I'm always trying to improve the thing that we settled on 2 months ago when we started writing that documentation. So you just can't do that in the financial world. If you want licensing, you have to stick with what it is that you believe is going to be your true MVP, and make it a true MVP, right? And get to market with that. All of your other ideas are easy, but the execution is hard, and your team can only.
Preach it.
Definitely.
It is so hard to execute ideas, and that's why not that many people make it. Many people try leadership just a little. It's like dipping there. You have to jump in and swim basically with it, and if you have good mentors, they would help you a lot.
Yeah, and I realized recently that I didn't deliberately try to find myself in a leadership role at all. It wasn't any aspiration at all. I just had a good mentor at the time. Unfortunately, he's since passed away, but at the time, I'm going back maybe 15 years now. And he, because my original background was actually going to be law before I went into tech.
Really?
I know
I know this. I know the story. I was going to ask you about it because it's such a cool transition from law into tech. I loved it.
I'm curious now.
Yeah, I forgot we discussed that, but yeah, okay. So, it was a bit longer. So I originally was an intern, very, very as junior as it gets. In fact, I'll even share with you what I earned. Right. So on this apprenticeship that I had, it was £75 per week. £300 a month, and I was paid monthly, and I had an apartment that would cost me £400 a month to live in.
Oh my God.
So
the balance doesn't.
No, and I work in finance, and obviously I can't count very well. So very rapidly I was in deficit every month, but I had a really cool landlord who went easy on me. So that was like one relationship. I thought, when I think back sometimes, and I go, God, if that landlord wasn't so open-minded to my situation, and he took a different route, maybe I wouldn't be here today. Maybe I'll be doing something completely different. But he was really cool. But meanwhile, I'm in this apprenticeship where the intention is to be trained as a solicitor and go on to do law. But the IT guy, oh gosh, and I really hope that when I tell this story that the individual that I kind of allude to doesn't hear this, because it's not very favorable. But when the existing IT guy, he was an example of where we were discussing somebody who'd been in the job for a long time, quite a legacy role and really stubborn. And he priced up a project to upgrade from just to solve the Millennium Bug issue. Right. I mean, we all remember that. The planes were going to fall out of the sky. The cash machines and the ATMs were going to throw out free money. It never happened, unfortunately. But the build up to it, there was, this crazy quote of millions of pounds to solve this problem for a really small law firm. And they've kind of committed to the project. And it was only because I just so happened by chance to have entered into a meeting and served the coffees, because that's what you do when you're an intern. Believe me, you don't do a lot of law at all. And I was bringing the drinks in, and they were having a meeting, and I just heard them discussing the problem, and I just, knowing no better, threw in a line like, okay, so why don't you just do X and Y and Z? And it just so happened to be with the CEO of the company and the partner and the IT guy. The IT guy kind of shut it immediately down. He was like, that's ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about. You're making the coffees. I'll have 2 sugars, please. Get back to your job. So I was called in separately maybe a week later, and it was about 4 months before. So yeah, it was about the October time or the September time of '99. And in the end, I said, look, I've got nothing to gain here, but if I take a machine, if I just stay behind and I take a machine and I get my kit and I upgrade the processor and, and it works, then you've lost nothing, right? So we did like 2 or 3 machines, and then that ended up being my first ever contract. So I ended up being, super young, not knowing how to negotiate a contract. And all of a sudden I'm going from making the coffees to selling.
But you were a lawyer. You should have known how to negotiate a contract.
Wasn't a lawyer, apprentice.
You were an apprentice. That's why.
That's the one thing they don't teach you, how to negotiate your pay.
That's true. Yeah, rule 101 of law school is like, don't know how to negotiate a better package, for sure. But yeah, so that was my introduction into tech, right? And it was completely accidental, and I had no aspirations before that to do that. And then that led into various other roles where I started to get more hands-on from a coding perspective and automate some processes. And, the rest is very much history, as they say. But yeah, I mean, I fondly look back at those times, and I ask myself, how did I survive for so long on like £100 deficit a month with 0 food? Like, I don't know how I did it. I really don't. But
you were young.
Yeah, I wasn't as hungry. I mean, look at me now. I mean, your listeners can't see me, but I like to eat a lot of food, so it wouldn't happen today. Let's put it that way.
I told my listeners that I studied law and graduated law.
Yeah.
And I knew in my first year that I wasn't going to practice it. I said, no way, Jose, not a chance. It's just too much competition, and they're fighting for crumbs. So I transitioned into tech, and I'll tell you, comparative to law, the pay is better.
I completely
the work
agree
is harder in my experience, but it's better paid.
I have the best of both worlds because my wife is a lawyer and she runs a legal practice. So somehow or other, I was magnetized back to that somehow. So our arguments are awesome because I can be like super passionate about what I do from a technical perspective. No, you're crazy. You're not thinking, and all this. I believe me. I can throw some hissy fits. But she's much more eloquent and like, well, I don't think you're thinking about it this way. And she'll just throw some stabbing comments at me that only a legal mind can challenge me on. And she always.
And you have a little of a legal mind, so it works out.
Yeah, but I miss those days. It was great fun back in the early 2000s. It was such a ride. It really was.
Oh, starting out. And that moves us perfectly to the next topic. Like, for aspiring leaders, what are the top leadership tips you would have for them?
Yeah, so I've given this some thought. Number one for me is you've got to say no way more than you say yes. Okay, we hear this all the time, but it's just so important. I can't stress like how much time, money, effort, and success would be totally pivoted if you could just literally just say either I don't know or just no. And more importantly, especially if you're at the executive level at some point, is say no to your CEO a lot. Like, just do not feel like just because the CEO has walked into the room and asked you something that you've got to stop what you're doing and move on to it or start to seriously research it. Because I can tell you from firsthand experience that the vast majority of the throwaway comments that I make to the team, I'd probably forgotten about an hour later, right? So yes. It's just not, so just say no as much as possible. Start every project with an exit strategy. I mean, personally, I kind of said this at the top of the interview. I mean, you got to identify your replacement as part of your growth strategy as early as possible. And you've got to As one of your first hires, hopefully, you've got to be willing to hand over the keys at some point to that individual. And the moment you recognize that you're no longer adding any more value and you're just collecting salary, I can assure you some of the best exit conversations I've had with CEOs have been the ones where they were completely like flabbergasted or side hooted with the idea of me leaving the project at that time, to the point where they would try and do anything to try and keep you. But you're explaining to them that no, you got to understand, this person here has been there from day one. They know everything. I'm really interested in this other thing now, and you guys are in safe hands and move on. And believe me, you'll build friendships for life with your colleagues if you can do that. It's a very hard decision to make. Just don't collect the checks. And you've got to fail like super quickly. And I mean at a project basis. In the first instance, if you can filter from your teams, the stuff that we just said before, the high risk stuff, that's like 101. But even when you're on a project and you've committed and you feel the pressure is on, you really want to get it over the line and you don't like failure, failure's good. I can tell you, if this is project 14, probably 3 have succeeded, and that depends on your definition of success. So, there's a very high failure rate in this industry, and I seem to look out for failure far more so than I do success, especially if the success comes from the first thing that you're on and the only thing that you've been on. That's far less valuable for me than project number 7, and you've learned you've built up a few scars along the way. So fail super quickly. And I know you asked for 3 things, but look, the bonus for me, just because of the climate, just don't let this pandemic scare you. Whatever you're doing right now, it might seem like super tough out there right now, with lack of jobs and far fewer opportunities, and the values are dipping down from an economy perspective. But take advantage of the fact that you can now work from home as much as possible, and just use these conditions to execute the thing that you've been trying to do. If you've ever considered kind of doing something on your own, and you have the risk appetite for it, some of the biggest successes have happened during a Great Depression. And that's not quite where we are right now, but a global pandemic will really make you ask some life questions. So you've got to have,
true.
You've got to have health in mind, but you've also got to have health in a professional capacity as well. So don't let the pandemic put you off whatever it is that you want to do.
That is so true. And as you said, during a crisis, that's when you get, usually most of the most successful companies were built in crises. They were not built during boom years. Most of the companies built during the boom years, they fail because they don't have the leadership, the mindset to survive with little resources. And when the resources dwindle a little, the company falls.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And I've been on projects where we've had really good funding from the off, and therefore it's felt like you've got tens of millions in the bank, and how could you possibly spend this in the next 2 years? And then 5 months later, you need a new raise. It happens. Yeah, it happens. So.
Oh yes, I've heard stories of companies that raised a lot of money and it was gone in a couple of months.
Yes, and it's always spent legitimately. Like there's nothing untoward.
Yes,
it's just
the
excitement of everything, and you want to get it done. But on what I'm working on at the moment, we've been really keen to not make that mistake, and it's a very lean team, very experienced but very lean team, and we're very hands-on as well. So until certain milestones are hit, I don't draw down on the funding that we've already been awarded. So we're in a very lucky position to do that. And for me, just tasting my own medicine, the pandemic has at least allowed me to kind of focus on that project more so than if we weren't in a pandemic, working from home, etc. I probably wouldn't have the time. So it's a new beginning for sure.
Yeah, and the thing about budgets that a lot of people doesn't understand, it goes back to accounting and 0-0 equations. Like you have to be spot on. You cannot go over budget and you cannot be under budget. And I know a funny story about a marketing executive. He got, I think, 140 100,000 euros budget for an 8 months plan. He was supposed to implement it. He got this idea that he was going to save the company money, and he bragged at the end like, listen, I did everything with 20 grand. Here's 120 back. And the executives lost it. If I give you 140,000 for as a budget, if you want to impress me, stretch it out as much as possible, but spend it all.
Yeah, agreed. It's a really easy metric, right? And most people don't realize this, and your story is perfect for it, because when it comes to raising, on the one hand, you don't want to raise too much because then you're sacrificing equity early, and therefore you're effectively giving away too much of the pie too cheaply. And then later in life, when you're lucky enough to draw down on your investors, if you're not spending their money, they don't see that as a return, full stop. That's just not the mindset to have. You've got to spend every penny as fast as possible if you want to be in the VC kind of world, that kind of vanity metric of whatever it is. But in my experience over the years, there's been different components associated to the levels of raise that you'll take. Some investors are interested in signups, like number of active accounts. Other investors are literally interested in the annual recurring revenue, or everybody has a different kind of thing for it. But what I promise investors, and I this is from an ex-colleague of mine that really gave me a harsh reality check on the funding cycle, was that you have to provide to your investor a very lemonade stand vision of exactly when they're going to exit, what the numbers are going to look like when you get there, and precisely what it is that you're going to do with that money. And if things pivot, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that you go back and say, hey, I changed my mind and there's 500,000 back. It's a case of use the 500, but just, people are investing in you as well to make the right decisions with it. So spend money like as if it doesn't exist when you're in business, if you can do.
Interesting advice. I like it. I love it. And since you have like a law background, I know law comes with a lot of reading. So what is the book that had the most profound impact on you?
It can be absolutely any field.
It doesn't have to be from law.
Oh, right. Any field. Well, listen, a little secret is I don't read books. I listen to them. I love Audible. It's the only way that I can find the time to read anything at all. And the vast majority of the books that I do read are autobiographies. What's that word? It's ironic I say it. Yeah, but thank you. If I read more, I might have known that.
No, all you needed was to own a Range Rover, and you would have known that one.
the autobiography, that's true. Sorry to ruin that, but yeah, the Audible for me is the future. So I just love other people's success stories. I'm genuinely addicted to the journeys that people take from beginning to end. So
what's the one that stuck most or hit closest to your soul?
To your soul.
It would. You may not know who this person is, but it's a UK Now radio host by the name of Chris Evans. Most people really underestimate this person, and anybody hearing that recommendation will say, who's this guy, right? But then when you look into his journey, it's the craziest, full of trials, tribulations, and positives and negatives along the way. And he's not, he's not a crystal. He's not completely clean himself. He's made some bad decisions along the way. And he's a terrible businessman by his own admission. That those are his words. But he's got 2 or 3 books or so that really tell a story of his life, and it's completely opposite to mine. But he's done business with Richard Branson and successfully kind of negotiated a deal against, probably one of the best negotiators in the world. He owns the world's most expensive Ferrari, and how he got it was a story. So check out Chris Evans, I suppose, and his autobiography. But beyond that,
I'm going to check it out for sure.
I'm actually going to check it out. Also, since you mentioned Bronson, and I kind of like you. I'll give you the best part that I found from his life and biography. He basically summed it up. I forgot on what page. That all his success came about from the fact that his mother, who was a stewardess, worked in airline, was worried that she might die, have an accident, because flying was very dangerous back then, especially across the ocean. And she was worried that her child would be left alone and not be well equipped to deal with life. So one day when he was very young, like 5 or 6, she took him to the outskirts of London, asked him, "Do you think you can manage to get back home from here?" He nodded yes, left him there and drove away. And he got back home on his own, and he said nothing seemed scary after that.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that was Losing My Virginity, I believe was the name of that book. And he was, absolutely awesome story and very true as well. And I wish, well, hang on, let me phrase this correctly. I was about to say, I wish more parents would do that, but I don't mean it that way. I just wish that everybody could have a challenge like that at some point in their lives, because you just don't
give you
know
that confidence.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't know what you're made of until you put in the situation. And I have witnessed friends that I thought would be the last people to step up when it was needed, that have been absolutely on their feet when it came to some kind of emergency, and they've just, blown me away, whether it be an accident or whatever it might be. But the other great thing I love about the Branson story, actually, just quickly on that, is that he, how he started Virgin Atlantic was just incredible. He was actually trying to impress a girlfriend of his, if I remember the story correctly, and he was on his way to take a tour of Necker Island, but he knew he couldn't afford to buy it, so he was just kind of showing off. And then along the way, his flight was cancelled, and he just decided, hey, let's just round up some people and charter a flight and get out there one way for $200 and call it Virgin Atlantic, and there you go. I mean, I love the drive as somebody who, we were talking before about ideas are 10 to a penny, but if you don't actually stand up and execute them, then you can't sit around when you say, oh, I invented the transparent toaster, because it's always in your mind, right? You don't really ever get it out to market, and you see other people doing it, you're like, oh, that was my idea, but just I don't ever want to be that guy.
There's a word for that, but I won't mention it on the podcast.
Yeah.
And Dearg, if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
I'm not really a social media guy. I do have a Twitter. If you want to join one of my 14 followers, please go ahead. I tend to talk a lot about golf and just the odd thing that frustrates me. But I think LinkedIn would probably be the best way. I'm pretty active on that, and I contribute quite a bit to it, and that's where the vast majority of my network is. So if you feel I can be of any use to you in any way, or recommend you to some folks in my network, then I do that every day. I spend 30 minutes of my day every day just literally reading inbox messages from people who I don't know who they are, forwarding their details to somebody else who I do know, where I know for a fact that they can help them out. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, well,
awesome. That's really generous of you.
That's how we met, and I think it was a fruitful connection. And for people listening, if you want to reach out to Dearg, I would recommend doing so, with the mention that you should use the mention and say, hey, I listened to your episode, so you don't come off as a weirdo or a stranger.
Well, you'd be surprised some of the messages I get. But yeah, that would be a far better subject line than some of the ones that I do get, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure, Dearg, having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, no, believe me, the pleasure was mine. I've been looking forward to it, and hopefully there's some value there.
Oh, yes.
Lots of
I guarantee.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was today's episode. Tune in daily. Rate, like, subscribe, and share, please. Oh, you can find further info and materials in the show notes on techyleadership.com, including links to the guest book recommendations.